We would like to continue with the series that we have been doing on the Ten Commandments. And we are continuing on the Sixth Commandment, which is do not murder, Exodus 20:13. We will just revisit the scriptures to remind ourselves of what it says. And then we will proceed. Okay, so Exodus chapter 20 verse 1, and God spoke all these things, all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And then we jump to verse 13. You shall not murder. So that is something that was spoken by the Lord God himself, and he says we shall not murder. Last Lord's Day, if you recall, we began by introducing this commandment, and we saw that the commandment deals much with the value that God places on life. We saw indeed that even from the way man was created, he is distinctly different from all other creation. We saw that all other creation were made what theologians call ex nihilo, means out of nothing. But when it comes to the creation of man, we saw that he was not created like that. God described for us the way he created man. He created man out of the dust of the earth. We saw that it was out of the dust which he formed into mud and then created man, and then he breathed life into man. That is what we saw. We also saw that before man was created, as it were, the Trinity of God, the Trinity of God planned, designed, and then created. Okay? The Trinity of God, man was not just created. God did not just speak and say, let there be man, right? But instead we find that the Trinity of God discusses, they plan it, they design man, and then they create man. Now, that we saw with the male, the creation of the male species of human beings. We saw then that when it comes to the creation of the female species, which was done after the male, again God describes to us how he puts the male to sleep, removes a rib, and creates woman. Okay? So that we see that when it comes to the creation of human beings, there is a definite program that, as it were, that God gives to us. He explains to us how he did it. Now, God would have chosen to explain to us how he created the elephant. He hasn't. All we hear is that he just said those animals should be, and they were. But to crown the creation of man, God gives man a responsibility that he seems not to give any other creation. The responsibility of placing names to the created things. So it is man who names the created things. That is one way in which we see God lifting up man above all other creation. After he has created everything, it is the man he tells to name the things or the creation. All right? Even when it comes to the creation of a woman, after the woman has been created, it is man who names. It is the male who names the created being, the woman. And so we just see there that God elevated human beings, both male and female, above all else that he had created. He as it were, makes them the crown of his creation. The crown of his creation. We are the crown of God's creation. And so when we come to the commandment, where God now tells us that we must value life, that we must not murder, we can start seeing the reason then behind God's insistence that we should not murder. We can now see the reason why God is insisting that we cannot take life. That life, especially of human beings, is very, very important. Last week also we saw that there are certain animals that we can kill, isn't it? So that for religious reasons, like for sacrifices, the Israelites were allowed to kill for sacrifices. We saw that we can kill animals for food or for clothing. And we saw that the government or the governing authorities are given power to kill as a form of punishment. We also dealt with the issue of killings that happened during times of war. And now today, with that background, we want to look at the real issue. Why murder is wrong. We alluded to it last week, but I think now we want to just look at that reality. Why is murder wrong? One of the things, I can erase this, I hope, then we can just go on. One of the reasons why murder is wrong, the first reason, is that it touches the image, likeness of God. Okay? So that is reason number one. This, I'm sure if you recall, we alluded to last Lord's Day, that it touches the image or the likeness of God. And this is what we see in Genesis. In Genesis and chapter 1, just go at the beginning. When we look at verse 26, we see God and the Trinity of God, as it were, in that discussion, that awesome discussion, where they say, then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. All right? So we see there that God actually did create man in his image and after his likeness. This is to say that man has certain characters that derive from God. And I want us to be very careful how we understand the image of God. It is not that man is like God. All right? It is not that man is like God, but that man has certain characters. God has put certain characteristics in man that derive from him, that are borrowed from God. All right? It is dangerous to think that man is exactly like God. We are not like God. We are not like God. God is holy, 3 times holy. We are sinful, isn't it? Even in the state when we were in perfect human righteousness before the fall, we were still not like God. We ourselves were not like God. But God had granted of his own will, perfect will, to give certain characteristics to the human being that are derived from God. All right? That are lent to us by God. They are not characteristics that we find in ourselves as of ourselves, but God gave them to us. For example, love. God is love, and he has put in human beings a desire to love. You understand that? A desire to love he has put inside of us. A desire to love our children, isn't it? We do not love our children perfectly like God loves us. Okay? When it comes to, let's just talk about love. When it comes to love, we love our children. But can we say we love our children perfectly? The way God loves human beings perfectly? God's love to us perfectly is shown in what? What is the epitome of his showing his perfect love to us? He sent his own son to die for us. To test Abraham's love for God. What did God ask Abraham to do? To sacrifice his son Isaac, didn't he? And it is when Abraham was willing to let go of Isaac, his one son, born in his old age, with the possibility that he would never have another one, God grants to Abraham the desire to actually offer that son as a sacrifice. And it is only when he's on the doing it that God restrains him and says, no, you don't have to do it. Now I know you love me. Now, as we say that we love one another, we love one another. We love our wives, we love our children, right? But even in our love for our wives and our husbands, there are certain things that when our wives ask us to do, or our husbands ask us to do, we say, no, that I cannot do for you. We reach a point when we say, no, that I cannot do for you. Sometimes we buy a phone and we say to ourselves, this one I will buy for myself. When your wife wants a similar or better phone, you say, no. You want to have one better than me. Isn't it? Or your wife buys for herself a phone, and when you want the same thing, they say, no, you cannot have one which is better than mine. Our love is not perfect. And that is what we do with our children. And that is what our children do with us. We do not love perfectly. Yet, the character of God's love has been placed in man to an extent. This is the image of God. God has granted to us the ability to create, to invent things, isn't it? This has not been granted to other creatures. It is human beings who have even invented clothes. Now we are using microphones to project our voices. Elephants do not use microphones. They have not been given the ability to create, to think and create. God has shared those a little bit of those attributes to human beings. We can fly planes. We have been given the ability to learn wisdom, to learn the wisdom of God. And so we see then that much as we are not like God, there are certain characteristics that God has allowed, derived from him, to be granted to man. And so we must therefore realize that the commandment's stress is that we shall not, you shall not murder. You are not to deliberately kill or premeditate and kill. In fact, you are not even to kill in the anger of the moment. God does not allow us to take life. That means that we must control our tempers. We must control our tempers. Tempers must be controlled so that we don't find ourselves committing murder. The fact that man has been made in the image of God means that taking another person's life is not our right to decide. That judgment is reserved for God and God alone. That is the thrust of this commandment. God does not allow us to choose to willfully, deliberately take another person's life. It reminds us, that commandment, that God is the one who has given life, and it is he alone who then has authority to take it or to grant others permission to take it, not us. And as we go along, we will see that this requires that we must be very careful, because deaths can also be caused accidentally on account of carelessness or unintentional actions. So we must be very, very careful. We must not take life, because human beings are created in the image of God. Any comments before we go to the second one? The second reason why it is wrong to murder. The second reason why it is wrong to murder is because death has a finality to it. Death has a finality to it. In other words, once we kill a person and life leaves him, it cannot be undone. You cannot kill someone and then bring them back to life. It is not like writing. If I write and I don't see that I wrote this, I can erase it, then I can write it again. Isn't it? Not so with life. Once life is taken, that person dies. That person dies and his life cannot be brought back again. There is no way of going back on murder. So before you act, think. And that in fact should be true of all killing, even of animals, even for food. Do you have to take that life? Do you have to take that life? Do you have to take that life? Especially seeing that life once taken, even of a chicken, cannot be undone. There is no life that you can take and return it back if you realize you made a mistake. Before we kill anything, let us stop and think. Is it necessary or just for sport? And when it comes to human beings, we remember what was taught at the conference, Hebrews chapter 9 rather. Those who were at the conference, as we looked at human beings, you remember Hebrews chapter 9, 27. Just as man is destined to die once, and after that to face judgment. Death of a human being is once. It is once. We die only once. We cannot die twice. Of course, there are people who believe in, what do they call, reincarnation, like Hindus. But we know that that is not true. It doesn't happen. People who believe that, you could die as a human being, then you come back as a goat or as a chicken, and those kind of things. The Bible does not teach that. The Bible actually teaches that man dies once, not twice. So the finality of death and the absence of a second chance is one strong reason why murder is wrong. Okay? Any comments or questions before I go to the third reason? Yes, please. Someone is asking, how does one, how you can control anger practically? Seeing as anger is one of the reasons that can lead to murder, yeah? That's why you are asking. Any suggestions? How can one control anger practically, seeing as it is one of the things that can lead to murder or to killing?
One of the ways would be to meditate, is to have a moment of things and rest down and meditate. Usually what happens is that Thank you. Usually what happens when we are overtaken by anger is that we are not at that particular moment sober. So to get your mind back, for lack of a better term, you sit down and just calm down. You reflect. You will realize that as you meditate at that particular moment, when you've taken yourself, you've removed yourself from the sin, you will sober up, because a number of things will now begin to play in your mind, especially as regards Scripture and the Spirit of God. So, for example, a question will begin to play in your mind, why am I doing this? So for example, animals, let's say you want to kill an animal and you take a step back, you'll ask yourself a question, why am I killing? So the question why will begin to play in your mind. Am I killing for food or for fun? So it's usually when someone meditate and reflect, just getting off the scene and reflecting on that which you're about to do. It has that sense of helping us to self-control. Many actions have been stopped from happening just by not acting at the moment, just by sometimes sleeping over the issue for a day or two. I'm sure that if he offended you and you took 2 days, by the time you're going to him, you shall have sobered up. In fact, you'll be so calm, you will have reflected about the implications of the things you're supposed to do. So that can help.
Yes, just pass it on to the lady there.
Another way that I think we can control our anger practically is by apologizing. Because when you're angry at someone, I'll give you an example. Maybe when Jude is angry at me and I can see that he's losing control, I'll just say sorry even if I'm not at that time. Because if you say sorry, it's very hard for whoever is angry to go on. They would have to be mad to just go on being angry. So if you say sorry at that point, it tends to work. Even if you're not sorry at that time, you just say sorry.
I want to disagree with you. I'm sorry. I want to
Elizabeth was asking for practical. Yes. I'm not talking about biblical now. This is practical.
But we can't shed off our Christianity. You remember, first and foremost, we are Christians, right? Yeah. So those sorries actually should be meant. Yeah. I would encourage us that because it's a learning process, right? I would encourage us that when we do say sorry, we should mean it and say it in such a way that the person receiving it believes that it is true, isn't it? I'm not encouraging us to say sorry while lying about it, yeah? But that we genuinely say sorry in such a way that last week, Jude will tell you, we had an incident in our office where one of the, now I digress, but just bear with me, where one of our staff members had insulted a colleague, and the insult went public, right? It was like me and Tony just passing information, and I'm telling him that he is a foolish guy, very stupid. But somehow that conversation just between me and Tony becomes public, and he sees it, right? And he gets annoyed and he's boiling. And I remember Jude called a meeting in the office to resolve that issue because it had become public. And I remember we talked about apologies. Jude, what did we say about apologies?
What you said about apology, you're the one who taught us about apology. This is what he said. The person who is offended is the one who knows how hurt he is with what has offended him or her. And the only way to seek forgiveness and apology is to genuinely say it from your heart and ask for forgiveness. And say it as many times. Mean it genuinely. Say it as many times, even over a long period of time, until that person to who you are apologizing and seeking forgiveness is the one who holds your hand and says, you have apologized. I really feel that deep in your heart, you truly mean to apologize, and you truly know that you want us to restore our relationship. You know, so that it is not you apologizing that determines how sincere, how deep. Well, it is the person receiving it who must feel the sincerity. It's not enough that you said, enyewe bwana, these things bwana, I have apologized bwana. Kwani how many times do you want me to apologize?
Yeah.
Why are you repeating this thing? Is it that, how many times do you want me to, You know, there is a way in which somebody, when you see that you have apologized and somebody's heart has not left the matter, you know surely that your apology has not reached. So you need to constantly apologize even when they flare up about it. Until that day that you will see them rest, you know that you have truly reached their heart.
So the effect of what we are saying is that apologies must be sincere, right? It must be sincere, and I agree with you that if anger flares, right, and the other person apologizes, then that cools tempers. Does the Bible support that? Yes. It does in the Proverbs. You know, a harsh response increases anger, but a humble response, I am just paraphrasing, a humble response or a humble reply mellows anger down. So there is a way in which that suggestion that you gave shifts to the other side, isn't it? It is not the person who was angry, while the response that pastor gave is on the person who is getting angry, isn't it? The person who is getting angry needs to reflect and meditate, if I got you correctly, and not to act on the spur of the moment. While the person against whom anger is being projected can apologize to calm the situation, isn't it? To calm the situation. So pastor's response was on the person who is angry. The actions that, those two are the actions that person can do practically to not to act on anger, while our sister Carol's response is much more on the person against whom the anger is being directed. Yeah, yes?
Well, I'd like us to drive our minds to a point that on Pastor's point, we should consider the fact that we need the Holy Spirit still, because if you're made angry, according to our nature, it's very hard for us to stay away from revenge, because it's part of us and we are corrupt. So this is also practical. We need to pray for our lives, because the Bible tells us we are saved every day.
So we need to pray.
Yeah, we need to pray. And then we should know that for us as Christians, we should know that making someone angry isn't good, because we shall lead them to do something that is against God. And we know that some people deliberately make others angry. So we should abstain ourselves from making others angry. And then to our side, we know that getting angry is not a sin, but what comes forth is what is a sin, the reaction thereafter. So back to Pastor's point, as we pray, we also need to learn how to let go the situations and then focus on God. Yeah.
When we are angry against our brothers, do we sin? We do. That is what Christ actually says. Anyone who is angry against his brother has sinned against that brother. Okay? We must be very careful when we make statements. Say that getting angry is not sin. It is what we do after. You know, it is because God sees that the anger is what becomes the intention of acting, right? And so in Matthew, he says that anyone who is angry against his brother has murdered that brother. But we will get to that. But yet I agree with you, the need for us to pray and to depend on the Spirit of God, seeing as we are corrupt ourselves. We are of corrupt nature. Any other? Yes, Daisy.
Just to emphasize on what Jonathan has said, practically as a Christian, I think the first thing you should do is look up, because you realize even in your anger that you make God angry so many times, yet he doesn't strike you when you do.
Yes.
So just being in the image and likeness of God, you also should exercise that.
Yes,
When you're angry,
restraint.
yes, you look up and you see that you've been forgiven, and at that moment you calm down and do that to the other person.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we have to move on now. I hope that helps Elizabeth and many of us or any other of us who had a similar issue. Thirdly, the third reason why murder is wrong is that of all the sins, it is the one with, it has it is the most far-reaching act of man. Okay? Let me explain. Murder is the most far-reaching act of man. Murder affects not just the person who has been killed, right? But it will affect who else? Pardon? Dependents? Yes? Relatives? Friends? Family? Community? Society? When you kill another man, the effect of that action has such far-reaching effects that you don't want to do it. Deuteronomy 22:8. Someone read for us Deuteronomy 22:8. Whoever finds it, just read it. Deuteronomy 22 and verse 8. Deuteronomy 22:8 says that even when you build a house, is building a house a bad thing? It's not a bad thing. Do it so carefully, and when you're doing the parapet of the roof, do it so carefully that you may not bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house if someone falls from the roof and possibly dies. What does murder do? It brings guilt of bloodshed to the family of the perpetrator. You have blood on your hands. You have blood on your hands. There is a way in which sin, the sin of one person, can easily taint those around them. People will say that this man killed another person. When I was a little boy in my village, there's a man who killed his stepmom over land. The first murder I heard of when I was a little boy, I was a toddler. And it was said in our area that man had killed. He just went and found that old lady digging, and he cut with a panga her neck. and eventually, of course, she bled and died. That man disappeared. But that family became ostracized. It is only recently, almost 50 years, 45 years later, that family has started sort of interacting with the rest of our community. And people looked at them as Nithijonek. You understand? The children of a murderer. You would not, even our parents would not want us to play with their children, because it was always found that it was strange that this man had killed his stepmom. It has the most far-reaching effect in that regard. It brings shame and disgrace to the family. And I think it particularly affects the murderer. It particularly affects the murderer. People see that person as a person who is not of right mind. For example, when you think of those terrorists, how does someone develop a mindset that lets him strap a bomb onto his body, knowing that when he blows himself up, there are possibilities that he's going to blow up babies, he's going to blow up women, he's going to blow up men, he's going to blow up lame or crippled people or disabled people. He's going to blow up anyone who may not have had any issues with them. How does one develop that kind of mindset? And that person, to him, it does not matter how much damage he's going to cause. Because there is a way in which killing hardens. It hardens us. And then it becomes easy for us to just kill. There must be something to do with our mentality. And one of the ways in which this has been promoted is what you call the subtle, is that how to write subtle? Subtle influence of modern media. The subtle influence of modern media. The television and the movies, where killing and violence has been glorified and accepted and exalted. It is called the desensitizing influence of media violence. We become desensitized. We no longer think of it as anything that is bad. And so we must be careful. Therefore, then, what we entertain in our minds or what we accept to imbibe. So those are some 3 reasons that I was able to come up with through my small study of why the command, of why murder is wrong. If there are no questions, I just want to go to what is prohibited. What is it that is prohibited? 1, premeditated killing. Premeditated killing. That is prohibited. Exodus 21:12 is clear on that. Even 14, Exodus 21:12. Anyone who strikes a man and kills him shall surely be put to death. And 14 says, but if a man schemes and kills another man deliberately, take him away from my altar and put him to death. So what is prohibited is deliberate killing. Can I pose a question? If you are a wife or a husband and your spouse has constantly abused you, constantly beaten you up, constantly kicked you, constantly, it is like every day, every day, every day, every day. Comes back home drunk, beats you, comes back home drunk. Is it permissible for you in bitter anger to react and kill him? Would it be acceptable? Remember what he has been doing. He has been constantly, days he comes home, kicks you, beats you up, comes home, maybe drunk. It's not good to kill her. In anger, even defending yourself. And then she dies. You can come that day, you can say, today, if she tries it, I'll kill him. Or I'll kill her. Yes, brother.
I think no, because just to support what you're saying, I think no, because this is something I had a chance to reflect on each and every day of the meetings. So you have, if you choose one day to say that today I'm getting, that is what scheming is. You had a lot. Scheming is actually having an opportunity to reflect. And an accidental one is not something you talk about. It happened once in a lifetime or something, and it was quite by accident. But something that has been going on repeatedly is something that you had an opportunity to reflect. If you didn't want any harm, you would have probably walked out of that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the line I was starting on the same passage.
Mm-hmm.
When we are still in Exodus chapter 21, verse 12 and 13, it says, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. There's an exception given there, but if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. So there's that situation where I would call it now self-defense. Maybe as you're defending yourself, you end up killing whoever was attacking you. Then God gives you a leeway here from this verse.
Because you are preserving your life.
Yes, because of that. In fact, the Bible says that God himself has let the person fall into your hand.
Yes.
Yeah. Then verse 14, but if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, which Brother Judas tried to explain, where you've had chances over and over and over and over again to escape, but you still have remained in that situation, and now the bitterness is growing and the vengeance is festering in your heart, and you end up killing the person. Even if this person hangs on to God's altar, he must be taken away that he should die. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. I think that will clearly already show you that there is going to be need for us to learn about divorce, isn't it? And Pastor will just have to find time and help us to see what the biblical view of divorce is. Because you had Jude say you didn't walk away from the marriage. All right? So those things will need to be balanced. Yes, you are right. What does the Bible say about scheming to revenge? Jesus teaches about it in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. And he says the following, you have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. In other words, he is advising and commanding that for believers, you don't revenge. You don't take revenge in your hands. You let the revenge remain with God. Don't scheme to murder back. But from Exodus, we have seen in 21:13, if God lets, in the process of you defending yourself, if God lets that person fall into your hand and something like that happens, then much as it is regretted that they have died, you did not at least murder them. All right? You did not. In other words, do everything that you can possibly do to avoid shedding blood. The other thing that is prohibited is murder through carelessness. That one we had already talked about it when we were talking about this person who is building a parapet, isn't it? Around his roof. Okay? God urges his people to live in such a way that they cannot be the cause of the death of another person. The way we drive vehicles on the road, the way we walk or do any other of our actions could easily result in the death of someone. And this is wrong. You look at Leviticus 19:16, and also the whole of Exodus 21 that we have read has various things about that. But Leviticus 19, if someone gets Leviticus 19 and verse 16, please read.
Leviticus 19:16.
Yes.
Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord.
Yes. Sometimes those who slander others, who speak ill of others, can cause death. You know, people, kuna wengine wanapenda kugonganisha watu. It is easy for them to make themselves look good, and the only way they can make themselves look good or remain relevant is for them to go and spoil other people's name. So I go to my brother Tony during our meeting and I tell him, brother, you know, there is this brother Jude in our church. That guy, he has been speaking ill of you. Really? Yeah. You said, you know, that you have this and that and that and this. So I make him angry. Do not go slandering people and speaking ill of them, because you could be the cause of death. In other words, you must not do anything carelessly. Even when we drive on the road, let us be careful that we don't cause death by our dangerous and careless driving. And that is why in Exodus 21, because of time we will not read them, it describes an incident where there is this ox that gores a man, and the man actually dies. The ox must be killed, but if that ox has been known to be aggressive, and the owner has not done anything to restrain it, then even the owner has to be put to death. There is a good lesson here. Manufacturers, for greedy businessmen who do things that cause maybe pollution and other people die, that is death by carelessness. And that is condemned. If you look at self-defense, Exodus 22, verse 2, if a thief is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, he is guilty. For example, you are sleeping in your house, a thief walks in, you wake up and you find the thief is inside, and in that confusion, without really knowing what is happening, you strike him and he dies. Surely you have not premeditated it, and it is something that God appears to forgive. But yet you must do everything to avoid that. So some of the things that you can do is make sure you lock your door at night, isn't it? Don't just leave it open. You say, if a thief comes in and he finds me asleep, I'll wake up and kill him, and that's okay. No. Lock your door at night. Lock your windows. Try to also protect yourself. If you have a vehicle, keep it in good order. Don't take it onto the road when you know that the brakes are not very good and you can cause death. The other thing that is condemned is abortion. Yes. Now I've erased everything.
Sorry. I have a question on
Yes.
self-defense. At one time in my residential area,
Yes.
during when the pandemic had just started,
When?
when the pandemic had started,
Yes. Pick up.
there were thieves around, and they will attack houses. So the community formed a vigilante. Yeah, so that when the thieves come, they will be able to gang up and defend our residential area. And in that course, 2 thieves were lynched. What can you comment about that in view of self-defense now that the vigilante was staying out at night waiting for the thieves?
Corgemos, they wait for people. Can we get reactions? Yes.
Just a clarification on that question.
Yes.
When you talk about self-defense, are we defending property or life? That would be my seeking clarification on self-defense.
So can we get a reaction? Pastor, you wanted to react?
When you talk about self-defense, you're talking about defending life, not property. And onto your question, it ties up with what is asking about self-defense. It is you being on the defensive, not on the offensive. A vigilante is on the offensive. So anything that they do is on the offensive, not on the defensive. We are talking about a case whereby you are attacked in the house. You never intended for this thief to come and break into your house. And then he comes in and he breaks in, and the only thing you can do is to defend yourself. Now, one of the practical ways through which to deal with such things like vigilante is for them to arrest or immobilize such people and take them to the authorities, because it is the government, if you look at Romans 13, that is allowed to execute things like capital punishment, not individuals. You cannot take revenge in our hands. You can't take law in our hands. So we can arrest them, capture them, and then take them to the government for action, to the police, actually.
Because even the tooth for a tooth, where was Christ against it? It had reached the point where the Israelites had misapplied that law. When they were told a tooth for a tooth, they would now themselves take a fellow and say, "You've removed my tooth, bring your tooth here." Right? That is not what he had said. He had given that authority to the magistracy, to the governing authority. Right? And he said, for you as a person, person to person, if someone strikes you and you know that they should, forgive them. By turning the other cheek just basically means forgive them. Don't react. That is the meaning of turning the other cheek. It does not mean that, you slap him, then you say, okay, slap this other side. No. It basically means do not react. Leave vengeance to the Lord. That is what turning the other cheek actually means. But you see, vigilantes who set out that we are going to wait for thieves, and when they come we will kill them, those are murderers. Those are murderers. What they should do, as he says, it is a good thing to be careful and have vigilantes to watch over the place, but their intention should be that when the thief comes, they will either arrest him or immobilize him sufficiently to be able to hand him over to the governing authorities. We are not allowed to take the law into our own hands. So, time is not on my side, but what is the other thing that is condemned is abortion, euthanasia, and suicide. From conception, what is in the womb is a child. It is a life, and all life is sacred. Exodus 21:22. Exodus 21:22. Maybe to 23. If men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands, and the court allowed. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. 26. So maybe you can just leave it there. But you can see that there is the issue of the pregnancy of the woman. The woman is pregnant, and therefore there is already life inside of her. Men must, even if they're fighting, they are not even intending to hit the woman, but they say they hit her and she gives birth prematurely and maybe the child dies, then that is a life that has been lost. And therefore it means that to deliberately do anything that causes the death of an unborn baby or an unborn child is itself murder. It's murder. What about euthanasia? Which is basically the idea that we offload those who we think are no longer necessary in life or useful, or they themselves think that their lives are not useful. Those who are aged and suffering. I like the way Pastor Eric Abwao responded to that at the conference. We cannot, was it Eric or Isaac? One of them. I think it was Isaac. And he said, you cannot go to God and tell him, what is this life that you are letting me go through? I don't need it, take it. Right? I want to kill myself. Let it be taken off me. We cannot do that. What about suicide? Suicide? Is suicide allowed? No. All the suicides that are recorded in the scriptures, none of them is uploaded. And there were suicides of all sinful men who are in despair, who did not look up to God. So, 1 Samuel 31, maybe I'll get us to read those ones before we close, because that is where I want to close. Pastor, you read for us 1 Samuel 31, 4-5. Deacon Emmanuel, just read for us 2 Samuel 17:23. John Roy, read for us 1 Kings 16:18. And then Elizabeth, just read for us Matthew 27:5. John Roy, I gave you 1 Kings 16:18. Okay, can I start with the pastor reading for us 1 Samuel? And then as they are reading those, I want the other people to open the following scriptures. Jude, just open to 1 Kings 19:4. Victory, open to Luke 2:29. Sister Eunice, kindly open to 2 Corinthians 5:2-8. 2 Corinthians 5:2-8. If you don't hear yours, you ask me. Elizabeth, kindly open to Philippians 1:21-23. Philippians 1. I've given you Matthew. Okay, Susan, open to Philippians 1:21-23. Right? So let us start with the first set I gave, that starts with 1 Samuel.
From
31, 4-5.
4-5. Let me begin from 3. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these circumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with it.
So Saul is the first person in the Bible we are told committed suicide. He wanted euthanasia, someone to kill him. That fellow refused. Then he put his sword and thrust himself. Is he applauded for having done that? No. God does not applaud him for it. Then we see the story of Ahithophel.
2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 23. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father.
So Ahithophel is the next person we see committing suicide. Does the Bible applaud him for doing it? It does not. And these were sinful men in despair. They were not looking up to God. Saul was not looking up to God. Ahithophel was not looking up to God. What about Zimri in 1 Kings 16:18?
And when Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house and burned the king's house over him with fire, and died because of his sins that he committed, doing evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and for which sin he committed, making Israel to sin.
You just hear the sins he committed being spoken of. That is how Zimri died. He also committed suicide. But a sinful man, isn't it? Who will read for us Matthew 27? It is Elizabeth here. That is the first set of people we see who have committed suicide and their deaths recorded in the Bible. 27:5.
Matthew 27:5. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself.
Judas also committed suicide in the New Testament. All those people, none of them is applauded by the Bible. Actually, Judas, his death was bad. Where he had hanged himself, he bloated and he just burst. No one even went to remove his body from there to bury it. He burst and his intestines just fell off outside there. These are deaths. And later on in Acts, we see the apostles saying Judas went where he belonged. Okay, let us look at other Christians who may have thought of committing suicide, but actually didn't do it because they knew it was not the right thing. If we can start with Elijah, 1 Kings 19:4.
This is what it says. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again.
Yes. We don't see that he was in despair, right? And it reaches a point where he says, "God, take my life." But does he himself go on and do it? No. He just prays that if it is God's will, he should die. But he does not do anything. What about Simeon? Simeon in Luke chapter 2, verse 29.
It says, "Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to thy word."
Because he had seen the promise. He was aged. He was advanced in years. But he was waiting for the Messiah. The day he sees Christ in the temple, and he knows this is the Messiah, he tells God, "I'm an old man. I don't need to be around. You can now take my life. I have seen the promised Messiah." But does he himself commit suicide? He does not. He does not. What about Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:2 and 8? Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:2 and also verse 8. Verse 2 and verse 8.
Verse 2 says, "Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling." Verse 8, "We are confident, I say, and we will prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord."
So, We are struggling as believers. We groan, we are wearing away, we are getting old, we are getting sick, we are struggling, we are being persecuted, and our desire would be to be away from this body, but at home and at home with the Lord. But does Paul commit suicide? It is not recorded. He does not commit suicide. What about Philippians? Philippians 1:21 to 23.
For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live on the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor. Yet what I shall choose I cannot tell, for I am hard-pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better.
Amen. We see the stand of those who believe in God. Suicide is not part of their vocabulary. They may desire to be away from this body, but they don't take steps to end this life. I will stop there, and next Lord's Day, I will deal with two that are condemned. One is passive aggression. Okay? You remember the teaching of Christ about hating your brother? And passive inaction. Okay? Then after that, we will conclude. We'll do that, and then we will see the spiritual intent of the Sixth Commandment. Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? Because we have to stop now. Pardon? I can't hear you.
People who prefer to be preserved by cryogenics, which is like cooling of your body for some time.
Yes. We will deal with that maybe next time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we stop there.